Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everybody. I know there'll still be a few more people trickling in as we get going here, but I'm Amber St. Louis from CanWatch, and I want to thank everyone for joining the 2023 CanWatch Academy. The Academy was designed to provide a convenient learning platform for our members, colleagues, and peers. We chose these sessions to respond to the professional development needs and interests that you've shared with us. We're pleased to provide this opportunity to support our members and have enjoyed a great week of learning with everyone so far. Today's session is being delivered with the support and partnership of Global Affairs Canada. I'm joining you today from Ottawa, Ontario, on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I would like to share my gratitude and respect to all Indigenous peoples from all nations across Turtle Island. They are the traditional guardians of the land upon which we live and work, and I acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory. Before diving into the session, I'll share a few housekeeping notes. So simultaneous translation is available in English and French. Please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen to select your language of preference. The session is also being recorded. This recording will be shared in the coming weeks on our website. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat box and we'll do our best to address them at the end of the presentation. And if you're having any technical difficulty, please write a message to Tina LaRochelle in the chat box as well. Now, I'd like to offer a warm welcome and special thanks to Criterion Institute for joining us to discuss Reimagining a Feminist Financial Future. Over to you guys.
Great. Thank you so much for hosting this. Melanie and I are excited to be with you for this time. We'll be going back and forth from the presentation being up, but thank you all for joining. I'll start off with a little bit of a why this question matters, right? So the conversation about reimagining a feminist financial future. Why is that an important conversation? And what we want to do in this time is a couple things. One is to break those words apart, right? You all know what feminist means. That part of it within this amazing audience is well known. But thinking a little bit about why we want to connect the words of feminism and a feminist future to finance, and why would that matter? And so a little bit of a background as an introduction to who Criterion is and what we do. So Criterion's a global think tank. I actually founded it 21 years ago, and we work on taking apart, demystifying, unpacking finance. One of the most ranging from insidious to powerful to complex to ubiquitous, right? There's very few parts of our life that is not in the end affected by our financial systems. And so what Criterion does as an organization is break apart those, the sort of inner workings of the financial system so that others can see themselves in it and changing it. I started as a high school teacher, my career 35 years ago now. And starting as a high school teacher, I would look out into the classroom and I could tell the difference between the students. I taught in Brooklyn, New York City. And you could tell the difference between the students who thought they were going to survive the system and those who thought they could change it. And as activists, as people working on issues of human rights, we often look at systems of governments and we say, well, we can and should try to change those. We'll look at social structures. We'll look at education systems, and we feel like we can and we should change those. Finance, though, systems of finance, things like banking and investments, is often put off to the side, and it is criticized, but we don't feel like we can change it. And so the importance of imagining a feminist financial future is about imagining that we can change the systems and not just survive them. And so that's what we're gonna unpack during this time, and I'll do that with my colleague, Melanie. Do you want to start and introduce yourself, where you come from, and why this matters to you?
Absolutely, Joy. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Melanie Hilton. I've been at Criterion for a year now. My background before Criterion, before I was introduced to the world of finance through Criterion, was in gender responsive public services and gender responsive budgeting. So I spent over a decade working at the grassroots level with different sized organizations, from local women's rights organizations in rural Nepal and Kenya, working on intersectional issues that affect women and girls, to managing gender programs for international organizations in Myanmar. I've also worked with India's government, training India's foreign and domestic civil service officers on participatory approaches to developing gender responsive systems and public services. So within my sort of experience or history of working on gender and how it intersects in different contexts and spaces and landscapes, you know, in my experience, we were often playing in a very small box. And that box would be, if we talk about gender responsive services and budgets, often confined to budgets set by countries, budgets allocated to their line ministries or ministries of gender and social welfare. And over time, especially when working in countries that were transitioning to democracies, Myanmar, for instance, the idea of there's so much more happening to frame the democratic landscape and how the public spaces intersect with private spaces, specifically in terms of markets, economies, and how finance creates those systems that then define long-term outcomes for human rights outcomes, for how women and children experience democracy in those burgeoning countries, was very mystifying, but also frustrating, because I was not playing in those boxes. I was told that, look at this budget, this is how much the Ministry of Gender has received, and that's what you have to work on in holding public servants accountable, working with, you know, in a very confined space. So my sort of thoughts around that was, how do I explore and navigate that challenge that many women's rights organizations are experiencing, whether it's funds, but wanting the bigger challenge of wanting to do good, but not given the full scope of tools to be able to apply to that good. And that is when Criterion entered my life, and specifically through the prism of interacting in spaces of finance, where finance is used as a tool to advance gender equality outcomes, became an imagination piece for me for a long time, but now a very concrete, realizable piece that we can do so much more if we tap into this space. So briefly, that's where I'm from, and that's why I'm at Criterion, and very excited to share more about our Feminist Financial Imagination report and the work we've been doing with you all. Thank you, Joy.
Thank you, Melanie. Maybe we can kick off with a little bit of imagining. So it is also, I'll start with the delight of Zoom, which is we are imagining human beings behind the cards that are on the screen of the people. So maybe we can start with a little bit of interaction. I want to name that Richard, I believe for a moment was on video. If anybody's able, this is not a large group. So if you are able to come on video, it might be that you're just sort of listening while you're multitasking in the background, but we'd love for you to join with your full faces if possible, but if not, we will imagine you as people behind. Thank you. Look, the imagination of the people behind the cards. I want to just start with, and this will start as a discussion. When do you need an imagination in your work? When do you rely on an imagination to do the work? And maybe let's just start and think about that before we dive into a discussion. Even close your eyes, and why does an imagination matter in your work? From whatever perspective.
I think a broad answer is it's a way to get outside of what's been done in the past.
When do you need that most,
Amber? Well, for me as a writer, it comes in a lot with just not rewriting the same documents over and over again, right? You need some imagination to do things a different way and try to reach people in new ways.
Oh, it's so funny. We can come back to this, but I think there is a power when we discovered that we could cut and paste. But there's also a moment where we cut and paste too often sometimes, and we just say, cut this, paste it here. Clearly, it'll work the same way, and it doesn't, does it? It doesn't. Where do you need it?
For me, when I have a 3-year-old, and often, this sort of, she'll always, when people ask, oh, what do you love about mommy and daddy so much? You say, I love when mommy and daddy play with me. And that's sort of, because in her world, the carpet in the room is the ocean with sharks swimming around. And there's this imagination component where you also are allowed, you give yourself the permission to think beyond what you feel is societally expected of you, because we are socialized into thinking within those boxes. We're socialized to think alongside values and all of that, but that imagination allows you to go beyond and just think of question, but also imagine things that you might have thought are completely impossible.
Great. Other thoughts? What is an imagination needed in your day-to-day work?
I don't want to be gloom, but for me, it's a question of survival, right? On a daily basis. I mean, living in the world that we're living with, we're very aware, I think, as international development workers, from my perspective. I mean, we're very aware of everything that, like, conjuncturally is kind of going bad, but to keep on, like, to just keep the faith every day, that requires some kind of different imagination on various themes, right? How we can keep on hoping, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Well, can you just tease out one of those themes, because I think that's it's so important what you're saying. Can you just give one example of one of those themes where you want to dig, where you feel that, oh, I need an imagination?
Well, I guess, I mean, climate change is the first thing that comes to mind, right? Like how there's so many solutions and possibilities there if we're just creative about how we tweak our message, how we frame it, I guess, also as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Any other thoughts? Thank you.
Just repeating some of what Annie said, we're living in an industrialized society where now we're dealing with, the effects of that. We're talking about decolonization and never having lived in a decolonized context. We're trying to move forward with a number of stages, having not lived in really equitable society. And so the only thing we can do is imagine something. And so I think there's a necessity around imagine, like, putting forward doesn't exist yet. It's in a lot of ways it's the only way we can to achieve the progress that we're hoping to achieve.
Oh, I think just spot on, right? That sense of if we live in the space of colonized, patriarchal, the norms that we live in tell us what the world is today, and create all the confines around that. How to step out of that? I'm saying it so much worse than you did. I just want to, yes, what you said was so important. Any other thoughts? You're imagining what you might say. How do we put words to it, right? I'll just take what we've been offered so far, and feel free to keep jumping in. This is it's a small group, we can talk to each other. But this idea of imagining a different way of being so that we can actually live towards that and not get stuck in our current reality. And the importance of hope is at some level about being able to imagine different futures. Because if we can, so much of how we imagine the future is about how we see the world today, but also our ability to break out of today, imagine different futures, and try to move towards them. We do. So one of the questions that we ask often in the context of investing is, how would you invest? So if you are an individual you're a private individual who, by the luck of the privileged draw, as a sort of luck of the draw, you ended up with $1 billion. Or you're sort of a place where a set of capital assets sit. How would you invest? So if we take a philanthropist and ask them, how would you invest if you believed your philanthropy was working? Parallel to that, I was at, I won't say who at Global Affairs Canada, but I was doing a training program at Global Affairs Canada. And in the midst of training, to think about how to use finance to create social change. I asked the question, how would you invest if you believed your ODA, Overseas Development Assistance, was working? One of the more depressing moments was as I looked out into the room, they had never imagined that. Think about that, right? For the organizations that you work in right now, take one program, one thing that you're advancing, and we all write logic models. We write those things that say, this is going to be the future. As a result of our work, this is the future that we could create. We have to tell stories and have metrics and all kinds of other things that say what that future would look like. But do we really have an imagination of that future? Or do we just have logic models on a box? How would we invest differently? The thing about finance that I'll start with, and then I'll slide back to the slides. I started as a high school teacher, but about 20 years ago, started working in finance and investments. I founded an investment firm when I was about 33, and 14 years ago, and founded an investment firm that focused on impact investing, about creating good through investments. And that took me into a journey that I never imagined I would be in, thinking about finance as a system of power, understanding it as a system of power. And so one of the questions within that became understanding how finance works. A thing about finance and investments is that it is fundamentally about imagining the future. Nobody makes money in finance today. None of their success as an investor is about what happens today. It's about their ability to know what will happen in the future and be right. So just think about a news story that you saw on television at some point, or read in a newspaper about anybody in investments, right? The stock market or real estate or any of these things that you hear about on the news on a regular basis. What they are always asking is what's going to happen next. What will be the recovery? How will different industries respond to different factors? What will be the future impact of climate change on our investments? Will this stock go up? Will Microsoft be worth more money in the future? Will this housing stock be worth more in the future? Because in the end, what finance and investments are about is to say, I'm going to imagine a future, and I'm going to put my investments in that future. I'm going to put my investments in companies today that will capture that future. It's not about whether or not I'm right today. It's about whether or not I'm right about what is going to happen. So in this way, the one profoundly hopeful thing about how we can, as social change actors, partner with finance is we can say, if you believe in a future that we believe in as well, that you would invest as if that future was going to happen. That you can invest alongside of us in that future and move it forward. one of the things that Criterion works on, to give one example, and then I'll shift to the slides. But one of the things Criterion works on is gender-based violence. And we are always asking the question, how would you invest differently if you believed that we could reduce gender-based violence in the future? What would that world look like? What would a world without violence look like? And then how do we invest today to make that world possible? Because what if we believed that the social norms were changing, that violence was going to be less tolerated in the future? And if we were not investing today as if that future was possible, then we would get it wrong. And I will tell you, more than anything, what people who work in finance want is to be right. Even more, like, they want to know that they are predicting the future, that they are positioned to capture that future. And so as a system of power, how do we align that? So what does that have to do with a feminist financial imagination? So with this, I'm going to make a little switch back and I'll walk through a couple slides. Want to do two things. One is to talk about what a feminist financial imagination is, and then we'll walk through some examples of what it would look like to implement one in the work of the work of creating a more equitable, less exploitative, more equal future for all. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And Melanie, if you can, would you mind dropping into the chat our feminist financial imagination report that you helped write so eloquently? So what is a feminist financial imagination? Starting about a year and a half ago, we created an exploration of what, with a set of feminists and others. I mean, most of the Criterion is a set of feminists. The people who work here are feminists, but also with feminist leaders. So a solutions-oriented mindset that facilitates the formation of new ideas, visioning alternate futures, and uncovering possibilities that would ensure that the power and the tools of financial systems are channeled towards advancing gender equality and justice in transformative ways. So I do want to name one of the key pieces here is this solutions-oriented mindset, really having a focus on what is possible, what would need to change. There is a way in which a feminist financial imagination does not start with cynicism. Back to the question we had before about hope, right? That at some level, to be able to bring a feminist financial imagination, it requires a visioning of what could be different, a visioning for an alternative, not just a critique of the present. And I think this is part of the comments earlier on about why an imagination is necessary, is in part because we can criticize the present, and that is important to do. But if we can't imagine an alternate future, we're stuck in the current loop. So it acknowledges that financial systems have exacerbated injustice and inequity, and at times, at many points, perpetuated violence and exploitation. And this is sort of a little bit of the tie between, we often talk about capitalism as an economic system. Finance is actually a part of any economic system. If we changed and got rid of capitalism, there would likely still be some system of finance that allows us to have capital, move capital, have a system of money, have a system. Capitalism is based on the idea of storing assets. Maybe we wouldn't have that, but we would most likely have some way to trade. And that is a system. It is a system that was made up by humans. When we talk about the system of finance and investments, it's a very tangible set of analysis, structures, tools, and because they were made up by humans, we can make up something else. It does not have to work this way. And so one of our colleagues in this, an amazing woman named Amy Haddad, who was the head of gender at the DFAT, the Department of Foreign Aid and Trade in Australia. And what Amy was really shaping in the idea of a feminist imagination was to say, how do we look at the ways in which our current system is grounded in patriarchy and colonialism? What we have now is rooted in patriarchy and colonialism and exploitation and all of that. We need to know that because we need to trace what our system is now and what were the interests that were informing it. But then we need to imagine something else in the future. Because if we're just stuck at saying, here is how it's broken today, we're grounded in the past. And so we need to do both and. I'm actually a historian. I have a PhD in history. What enables me to work in finance, because I can tell the date that we made this crap up. And that allows me as a historian to place things historically and say, this is where it comes from. And also to say, so the system of the ways in which financial systems have fundamentally exploited that were created in part for the purpose of exploiting certain populations. We need to know that, and we need to imagine something different in the future. So it's both about naming what it is now, but also imagining what the future is. So what then would become possible is that feminist organizations focused on creating transformative change would be able to exert influence over financial systems to change them. This third bullet point here, what if the measures of economic success were actually based on the full understanding of work and not just the formal economic definition of work? To do that, though, requires that we engage in how finance understands those systems now, the way finance does its analysis now, so that it can change into the future. So this keeps coming back to this question, and I will say what criterions, the hardest part of criterions work is making a case to people like you who are working on gender equality that thinking about finance is worth your time at all, because you are busy and underfunded and in systems of power that are undermining your work. And so the idea of taking on yet another system, mildly overwhelming. So the question is, why focus on finance? Why should an organization working on feminist social change, working on deconstructing patriarchy, colonialism, why focus on finance? One part of it is it is arguably one of the most powerful systems on the planet, and we ignore it at our peril. It will continue to affect things if we do not take it on. That does not mean that everybody needs to take it on, but we need more actors who have the knowledge of how social systems need to be changed, engaging in systems of finance. The second reason is this example about microfinance, which is that there are people who are, in the name of gender equality, making changes to finance and saying, ah, voila, if we make this change, if we create microfinance, we will have enabled women to leave economic imprisonment and feel economic empowerment. Except it didn't work that way all the time, now did it? It also meant that that system of microfinance, which was intended by the actors who were creating it, they thought, maybe at a very surface level, that they were doing something good. But in many ways, it went quite wrong. And it meant that there were unintended consequences. So how do we think about the ways immediately adjacent to our work? For all of you who work on sort of global social justice issues, the issues around land and land titles are central to how we what becomes possible within a community is often grounded on who owns the land. Our ability to maneuver through that is about understanding systems of finance. So this is our general plea to say it's a very powerful system, and therefore it is immediately adjacent to the kinds of change that we are trying to create. It can often undermine the change that we're trying to create. But also there are actors out there who are trying to create a different future using finance. There are many, many bad actors. There are also good actors. And how, in partnership with those good actors, can you create change? So over time, over the last 10 years or so, Criterion has worked to develop a set of 5 strategies. And there's many ways that we talk about these. There's many resources available on our website and other places to think about these different strategies for fostering a feminist financial imagination. And so walking through each of these 5 strategies is what we'll use the balance of the time for. Any questions that are coming up though before I dive into that? Just giving a moment of pause to say, are there questions in the chat? And then I'll dive into what these 5 strategies are. Yes, Karen.
Hi, Joy. Karen Schulman Dupuy from the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce. I just, not a question per se, I just wanted to really applaud the perspective that you're bringing here, because we're also recognizing the power of adjacency issues, and we really see the connections that you're making as well. So I just wanted to give you a little show of support and recognize that that we agree, and look forward to working with you on this kind of a subject going forward. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, we really need, I mean, I think there are, there's not enough places where we're building this bridge and having a robust enough dialogue, right? Because there's so often the places is, well, finance is the problem, capitalism is the problem, therefore we should stay away from it. Okay, that is a choice. I want to respect that choice. I think it's really hard to stay away from capitalism, what with it being ubiquitous. But the question of how do we step in to that dialogue?
Yeah, and I definitely appreciate the perspective that you're bringing in the sense of it, finance, of course, in all of its definitions, being the largest system that we're butting up against. You know, obviously, a lot of the work that we're doing is how do we bring kind of feminist principles and, you know, more economic equity principles to bear as, you know, as we address kind of the systemic issues, as well as, you know, informing our programming or our outputs and the like. So, yeah, absolutely. I think that there's an emerging community of people that actually are seeing kind of these systems lenses. So yeah, very much appreciating the presentation so far. Apologies for being late, but also looking forward to collaborating with you as you go forward. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so I also read, I think a couple ways to think about this. One is the adjacency question that you just named, Karen, which is where are the places in which finance is immediately adjacent to what you're working on? So it doesn't necessarily mean, sorry, I'm back to my New York speed of talk. My apologies, Madeline. The sort of thinking about what are you working on and where are the places where finance and systems of investment are immediately adjacent and therefore not dealing with them is going to affect how you're implementing your work. The second is where might there be additional possibilities to have impact that you haven't imagined because the systems of finance were not something, and let's just name it, it's very difficult to imagine in a foreign language, right? And if finance is not your language, then it is very difficult to say, I can imagine what I could do differently because you don't know how to think, you don't know how to dream in that. And so that is the journey, right, Melanie? That's sort of how do we learn to dream with different tools than we had available to us before? Yeah.
No, absolutely, Joy. I think for me personally, you know, my journey into finance through Criterion for the last year has been that tug of war. I understand what you're saying, but my mind is not trained to think of this way. So there's a huge language barrier that's very, you know, language that's specific to finance and language that's specific to gender. It's taken me personally some time to sort of wrap my head around, you know, understanding finance and being able to say my lack of the language skills in finance should not be intimidating to sort of make me feel that I can't interact in that space. So it's and I'm sure a lot of individuals who work within the development sector have that have that feeling too.
Melanie, just for a sort of broad access, when you were up at when you were at the Equal Futures conference, you walked around with our cute little box of cards that we have proven. We have this little box of cards called Toolkit, but it is also online, Melanie. So I wonder if you can drop in the link to that. We're definitely working on a better interface and all of that's a little. It's not the easiest thing to encounter online. It's much cuter as a box of cards, but we have proven, and happy to send anybody who wants a box of these cards. We have proven that if you put it on your bedside and sleep near it, it by osmosis comes into your brain. But this toolkit is based on these 5 strategies of how to use finance to create change. So how do I share? So the first strategy is about channeling investment capital to enterprises or opportunities, creating transformative change. And so there's a bunch of examples that are here. But let me tell you one story that I'll maybe pull through as an example. It's one of the favorite things that we've worked on. In Criterion has a deep commitment to working in the Pacific Islands, and with a set of wonderful, if for those of you who have worked in that, there's just an amazing feminist network of actors within the Pacific Islands. And one of the, so we were at the time partnering with DFAT, the Australian government, and they were very interested in questions of menstrual health and looking at, particularly in the Pacific Islands, which is where we were sort of, grounded, how to increase access to menstrual products in the Pacific. And they had written a report, sort of one of these classic reports about what will shift gender norms and other pieces to be able to enable greater access and shift the norms around menstrual health to create greater outcomes. So we put together an investment fund that funded enterprises working in menstrual health. And I want to name the scale here. It was $50,000. It's not $20 million to sort of transform menstrual health in the Pacific. It was a targeted set of money that went appropriately to, and I'll come back to that in the next part of this story, but it went to 10 enterprises who were working on menstrual health, creating reusable pads. So you could channel investment capital to enterprises or opportunities creating transformative change. These women, Bella, MJ, all of the women who were working in these enterprises were creating transformative change within their community, and moving the capital to their businesses made a difference. So the second piece, influencing the benchmarks. So this is the second strategy, influencing benchmarks against which the success of the investments is measured. And this is really about shifting the thinking of those who control the capital. Being able to expand the people who hold the investments, who are making the decisions and shaping their priorities. So back to my menstrual health example, as we were working with the enterprises, as we were partnering with these enterprises in the Pacific Islands, we were also collecting a set of global set of investors and a set of investors in this case in Australia, for whom menstrual health was a priority. There is actually an investment fund who spends their time, it's based out of Sweden, it's called The Case for Her. And their entire work is to influence how investors invest in menstrual health, feminine sexual pleasure, and I'm just taking this personally, menopause, because there is not enough money moving to actually make a difference on menopause, I will say, as a 56-year-old woman. And so what The Case for Her does, and they are literally working right now to set global benchmarks for what it means to invest and make a difference on menstrual health and menopause and sexual pleasure, parts of the sort of sectors, industries, economic areas that are underinvested and wrongly invested. And so that's the second strategy. The Case for Her came into our investment in the Pacific Islands, and they were part of that opportunity. The third, introducing, this is if I was staring at all of your faces right now, I would ask you the question, How many of you have data and research? Because that's the asset that you have. That is the most important thing in, this is a lot of what Criterion focuses on. But you have amazing knowledge of the world. And so this strategy is about introducing or advocating for new data or eliminating bias in how data is assessed in order to shift how finance assigns value. So bringing this back, in one of the challenges in working with this set of enterprises is all of them, not all of them, let's say 75% of them were informal businesses. They were not incorporated. They were attached to a health clinic and they produced menstrual pads to be able to give away for free to those who attended, who came to the clinic. They were at the scale of their community and they worked at the speed of trust. They were deeply community grounded and they had no desire to grow. And what was happening in the first round of the Australian government looking at menstrual health in the Pacific, they said, we value growth, scale. Let's figure out which of these companies is gonna go big. Oh, for the love of God, none of these companies had any desire to go big. They wanted to solve for the problems in their community and did not want to scale. And so what we needed to do is to show to the investors that scale is the wrong thing to value. Stability, ease, resilience, strengthening folks' ability to survive was what was needed, not growth, and to shift how they understood their business. Which means we needed to shift the structure. So what finance does is it connects a set, it is the tether that binds a lot of relationships. You have a relationship with your bank. You have a relationship with your sister-in-law if you've ever lent her money, right? The relationships that are formed through finance are critical in our world. And so the structures that we use in finance matter. So shifting the structures in terms of an investment to change who holds what power in the relationship. This is actually what we did in this opportunity. And Melanie, if you get a chance, if you can drop in the video about this, because there's this beautiful like 18-minute video that I'm not sure if we can access right now. Well, if anybody wants to see it, we'll get you to it. It's a lovely video that tells the story. But here was what we did. These were informal businesses that did not need or want to grow. They wanted to serve their community. But the problem was that they were paying extraordinary costs to get access to materials. About 80–90% of their business costs were to access the pool, this sort of absorbent fabric, and they didn't have access to it except at retail rates. So they didn't need to grow their business. They needed to reduce the costs of the materials. Pay less for pool, pay less for fabric. So what we structured is a trade finance vehicle. So there is a menstrual health trade finance vehicle in the world that its job was to shift the power that they had in trade. When they went to be able to get access to goods, they had no leverage. They had no power. They had to beg, borrow, and steal to be able to get access to other people's containers, to have somebody bring materials in suitcases on airplanes. They did not have access to markets where they had any power. So we built a trade finance vehicle that enabled them to have different access to materials imported from China. So we created the structure then, the trade finance vehicle brought in the materials, sent the materials to the Pacific Island businesses, and they owed money only when they used them. So the collateral here was the material. It changed the power dynamics. It allowed them to make different choices. It allowed them to imagine their businesses differently. They could have more efficiency in their work. There was one in PNG that actually did take all of this and help her grow her business because they had access. They changed who had power in that setting. And then finally, expanding what expertise is trusted in investment decision-making. When we started this, the primary question that everybody was asking was, how do we get technical assistance to these women so they can fix their businesses? We literally had to ban a conversation about technical assistance from a conversation to say these women don't need to be fixed. You don't need to fix their businesses. You don't need to fix them. What you need to do is listen to them. Trust their expertise. They know their markets. They know what they need. Listen to them and help them get it. And we worked with this firm, Red Hat. It was Red Hat Capital. It was these guys. They were truly guys. They were guys, blokes, Australian blokes. And these men had to rethink their own understanding of their expertise. And they did it quite elegantly. They rethought their own power and said, our knowledge matters less as investors than the people that we're investing in. And that was profound. They decided actually that the women who they were investing in knew their businesses, didn't need technical assistance, didn't need to be fixed. What they needed was access to the power so they could participate in the market. So in the end, tying this all together, this example of looking at this one investment vehicle, obviously it's a very small example, but it's asking the right questions, right? And so possible next steps. What I always suggest as people are thinking about moving in to Reimagining finance, and on our website is a bunch of blueprints, including blueprints for grassroots organizations, blueprints for women's funds, to think about using finance as a tool for social change. And what it always starts with is paying attention. Don't turn away when the part of the news broadcast turns out to be about markets. Listen a little bit more. Don't flip through the business pages of the newspaper. Pay a little more attention. Listen to the language that they're learning and take it in. Think about collaboration. Talk to funders to say, we want to explore this area. Give us a little give us space to do that. And think about what's a starting place. And so hopefully this is a starting place. We're happy to stay in conversation with you as you continue to explore, and I'll let you have the last word, Amber.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you so much. That was incredibly insightful, especially for someone like me who doesn't delve into a lot of that in my day-to-day work. So I hope it was insightful in a different way for those who do work with this in a more day-to-day matter. I know we have to switch off, but if there was any final comments, I'll open it up quickly.
And thanks, Melanie, for finding that video. If for those of you who want to grab it, it describes the process. But final thoughts, and Karen, thanks for coming on. Thanks for coming on video, and look forward to collaborating more. Please reach out to us. We're relatively easy to reach and happy to collaborate in a variety of different ways.
Great. Thank you both so much.
Thank you, Amber. Thank you, everyone.